Good evening, everybody, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mad Barn Live. This is our very first podcast. My name is Elissa. I'm here with Scott Cieslar, who is our founder and grand poobah of Mad Barn. If you've never seen him before, you're seeing him now, ladies and gentlemen. And we know he's been kind of out and around there doing the podcast circuit. So this isn't brand new to you, Scott, but it's certainly brand new to the company to be hosting our own podcast.
It is. This is session number 1, and we'll see how it goes. It's, I don't know, fly or die, I guess.
Well, we're going to have fun with it. Scott and I have actually known each other for a long time. I was one of the original Mad Barn employees back in the day when there was maybe 4 of us, I guess.
There was 4 in total, yeah.
Right?
This is a good 6 years ago now.
I know. And now look at where we are. Like, when we were sitting there having that coffee at Starbucks, 5, 6, 7 years
Starbucks,
ago.
I believe it.
Well, I think it was because I don't have that kind of cash, or at least I didn't have that kind of money to go to Starbucks back then. And we went, and I just can't believe we're sitting here in our own building, which has the Mad Barn logo on it. We're in our own studio. We have a huge warehouse in the back full of product. It's amazing.
It is pretty amazing, actually, that we've come this far. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Not to talk about us. We're here to talk about nutrition and how to feed horses, because that is our mandate. Correct?
It is, yes. So if you've got grain on the brain, like we do, we're going to talk about that today. And I'm a horse owner. So what I want you to understand is some of these questions today are really coming, yes, they're coming from you, and they've been, kind of prompted to us to ask some of these questions today, but I'm asking them too as a horse owner myself, because, coming from a horse family, I learned how to feed racehorses, which is energy, sugar, let's get them going so they're ready for the races. But feeding your horse that's living in the backyard at home, feeding your show horse, feeding your barrel horse are all completely different things, correct?
They are very different things. And then actually, even the way we feed racehorses today has changed considerably from the days when you and I probably started out in the racehorse business. And we've learned a lot, and you've seen this big shift away from the sugars and the starches and moving more towards how we naturally should feed a horse with forages. And even when we're feeding concentrates and more fibrous sources to enhance hindgut fermentation and optimize basically the microbiome of the horse to get as much out of non-starch and non-sugar feeds as we can to feed the horse the way they evolved to eat.
Right. And we've evolved as owners too. Back in the day, you just bought a bag of feed and fed your horse. Now there's a lot of research that goes into this from the horse owner. And thank goodness there's a company out here like Mad Barn that's able to really help educate us in how to balance a horse's diet.
Yeah, that's really what the whole purpose why we're here is to help horse owners to feed their horses appropriately. Because again, you have this animal, and they're like, it evolved to eat, basically eat forage, spend most of its day wandering around eating lots of different, forages or shrubs, and even just various things that weren't grains and whatnot. And then we domesticated the horse, and then we totally changed the way we feed it. We're trying to bring it back to make sure that. Bring it back to, it is a more natural way to feed, but just to meet both their physiological needs and their ethological needs. So both from a behavior. And if you listen to any of the podcasts previously, there's just a lot of talk on forage, but then also a lot of talk on behavior, because it's both sides of the coin we have to meet. It's not just a chemical composition of feeding the horse. We actually need to, their psychological well-being is very important as well when we're feeding these horses.
Right. And so, we get a lot of phone calls and a lot of conversations that take place at Mad Barn about behavior issues. And we're going to talk about that today, but we're going to talk really about the basics, like balancing out our horses' diets. How do we do that? Do we need a grain-free diet? What kind of things do we need to help with our horse's behavior? What do we need if we need more energy in the horse? And we've asked you as well to join us here today because we'd like to hear from you too. So if you have any questions for Scott, you're more than welcome to put them into the chat on the podcast, and we'll be able to answer those as they come in, and maybe we'll answer a little bit later on, just kind of see how things go. And look at this, they're popping up already. So we have people watching us, Scott.
It's successful already. This is great.
And the interesting thing is the first question is coming from somebody in the endurance business. And, Scott and I both originally come from the racing industry. So, endurance is another form of racing, and learning how to feed those horses is a completely different ball of wax than, feeding your traditional standardbred thoroughbred. But we want to start off first, before we get to Pauline's question, we're going to start off first, just let's go peel the layers back here, Scott, and let's just say, what does it mean to feed a balanced diet?
Well, I mean, it's obviously very basic when you say balance. Like you think of scales and things in balance, but scale, like if it's just two pieces, you bring it into balance. The problem with nutrition is you have just a myriad of nutrients that you do need to bring into balance based on what that horse is doing and what it needs. But just kind of, from a nutritionist standpoint, what we look at to bring things in balance, number one, energy. Energy is everything, right? We can talk about minerals and vitamins later and protein and all these other things, but we need to meet the energy demands of that horse. We can be a little bit over, and over time that horse is going to gain weight, and that can create problems. We can be a little bit under, and over time that horse is going to lose weight. It's going to become lethargic. It's not going to perform as well. So and it's probably one of the hardest things to do is, partly because it's hard to estimate the energy contents of feed, how much energy that horse is actually getting out of feed. But we work away at that, and that's the first thing we want to do is we want to hit the energy requirements. And actually, after that, the rest is fairly easy. But the basics of hitting the energy requirement is knowing what's in the forage.
Right.
So again, it sounds like a broken record of we spend an inordinate amount of time looking at supplements, looking at complete feeds, looking at all these things we purchase for the horse, and then we just throw this hay in front of them, or we stick them out in a paddock somewhere. And they're like, well, here's some grass, and you eat that. And we don't know what the chemical composition of that is, yet it makes up the vast majority of the energy, the protein, and the minerals and vitamins that horse is going to consume in a day. So again, broken record. We want to actually analyze the pastures and the forages so we know what's in there, and then we can estimate, okay, how much energy this horse is going to get. The rest is actually relatively easy. Surprisingly, you would never think it's that easy based on the feed industry and all the marketing you see just around like all the different things you need to feed this horse and all these different like, oh, you need this omega, you need this amino, you need to do this and that. And it's like those things are actually relatively easy to hit once you get the energy right. So then we're going to balance out the protein. Again, coming back to it's very fundamental about what's in that hay. Right. So then once we do that, we can do the macro minerals. We go down to the micro minerals and we do the vitamins. We balance those things out.
Okay. Let's go back to the beginning here again. So I want to know what's in my horse's hay. How do I do that? How do I get it tested? How do I find that out?
So the best thing to do is take a sample and send it off to a lab. And so sampling, we want to sample a minimum of 5 bales. If it's bales, like small square bales, minimum of 5. Even with big round bales or big square bales, if we're using those, we want to get multiple samples because we want a composite of what we're feeding. Now, some people get quite specific about this and they're like, well, it's going to change, fields change. And yes, that's true, but it is a biological system. There's a ton of buffering capacity, I'd like to say. So as long as we have a general idea where we're at, that's a great starting point. So we'll sample, and we can even sample pasture as well. And then we send this off to a lab, they analyze it, they send it back to us. And we've developed a model that we provide online for free that we can input all this data into. And I think this is one of the questions we're going to get to later, is where do we come up with these nutrient requirements and we balance them with the nutrient requirements of that horse. Right. And so once we've determined from a laboratory analysis what the horse is actually consuming, then we can figure out what else actually needs to go into that diet to make it completely balanced.
So what's important to say here as a customer, because I'm a customer as well of Mad Barn, is that what I'm getting when I'm doing the diet evaluation and I'm sending in my forage analysis, I'm getting a program specifically to meet my individual horse's needs. It's not what we're doing is this is what you need, and somebody else is getting something completely separate if they live in, let's say, BC, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So because if you have a hay analysis, we'll input your exact data. And so we have some off-the-shelf products, like if we're balancing the minerals and vitamins, right? Because just to take a step back, like the protein and energy things, we kind of direct you, the horse owner, to where to go get that, because we're not going to supply it. It's easy to get. There's lots of ingredients we can use to feed that. The minerals and vitamins are what are hard in terms of, because there's so many that we need to balance. So when we do actually have a hay analysis, we get very, very specific about the amount. Now, sometimes this off-the-shelf products work for a good majority of the people. And the reason for that is because we use thousands of samples to balance, to make those products. So there's a reason why it fits for a lot of people. Right. But if it doesn't, then we're gonna offer up a solution that's not an off-the-shelf product. We're gonna say, you know what, your hay may be a little bit outside of the normal parameters. So we're gonna be like, this is what the ideal situation is. And then there's also, you have to take into consideration the practical aspect, right? So there's the theoretical perfection of a diet, and then there's the actual practical implementation of a diet, where somebody's like, well, I can't do that, or this is too many ingredients to feed. And so then we'll work with that person to say, okay, well, let's get as close to it as we can, but still providing optimal health for your horse.
And simplifying it too, right? Because sometimes people are like their own mad scientists in the barn, right? They're concocting all these different formulas, and we can actually make that really simple. And if you're feeding 30, 35 horses or more, I mean, you don't want to be spending 2 hours in the feed room. If you can make this happen fairly quickly, that's key, right?
Well, honestly, this is one of the great things about having individual nutrition consultations is that we can talk to you and you can say, because some people do want to be the mad scientist, if you will. They want to mix and they want to be down to the milligram of what they're adding. And then there's others that are like, there needs to be some efficiency. There's cost considerations we need to take into account. And we'll take all that into account and say, okay, here is the optimal for your situation, optimal for the horse and what you're doing in that case. Always with the horse's best interest in mind, right? Like it's always about, okay, we need to do what's best for the horse in your situation.
Right. We always, here it is all about the love of the animal. I mean, all of us that work here are pretty much horse owners or involved in the horse industry. So, you know, and we use the products as well. And we've utilized Scott to help us all make our horses in tip-top shape. So, okay, so now we've covered some of these deficiencies and where we can help balance them out. But so once we've basically kind of balanced the diet, so we've taken a look at the hay analysis, and it's no big deal, right, Scott, if you don't have a hay analysis, right? If you are at a boarding facility, you tell us where you are, we can get fairly close without the actual hay analysis, correct?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the great part about having such a big database or library of forages and different labs that we work with. And I've even said, take a picture of it, send it to us, because we can get a relative maturity based on the, how much seed head there is on it, what, different types of grasses that may be in it. We can go, okay, this is where we're at. It's not a perfect thing, but it's better than just, I guess, wildly guessing. And so, we have this huge library to draw on. If we know some species that are in your hay and we know the relative maturity, we can get pretty close, at least to give us a barometer of where we're going. And then there's also just the feedback from the horse owner, right? Like, you give a diet recommendation and then a month later the owner comes back and says, well, my horse is losing some weight and that's not what we're going for. Well, we can easily adjust that. So we may be just a little off, so we'll make some adjustments to the diet. We maybe add some soluble fiber in the form of beet pulp, maybe a little bit of oil just for energy from a fat standpoint, to get the diet balanced.
Plus you have to tweak periodically as the year goes on, as the horse ages, as the horse comes into work, as the horse takes some time off. Things have to be tweaked, right?
Yeah, it's never black and white. It's never like this is one diet and it's gonna be perfect forever. It's very much a conversation going back and forth between the horse owners and the nutritionist. And the idea is you have the person that's with the horse that has the practical experience with their horse, and then you have a group of experts that know exactly how to, like, okay, this is what we need to do to get you to where you want to be. And this is the dynamic we're trying to deliver, I guess, to the customer base.
Yeah, because you really do have a relationship, and that's what we want at Mad Barn, is for you to develop a relationship with your nutritionist, so they're part of your team too.
Absolutely.
Right. You can call on them if the horses, something has changed and there's an issue with the horse or whatever. They are available at your fingertips, which is an amazing thing. I mean, who has that?
No, it's true. I mean, it's honestly, it's been a bit of an experiment to to provide this to our customers, but it's really what we wanted to do and be able to deliver to people. And it's essentially coming up with a model that works for everybody, for the customer, for us, and to be able to deliver information to that they can utilize. And like, you talk about balancing and whatnot, like we don't expect the horse owners to be nutritionists, but what we do provide is complete transparency in the sense that we do your diet for you. We have the online model at madbarnfeed.com, which is free to use for anybody. I mean, there's other models that exist. The NRC, which we can talk about later a little bit, has a model online. It's a much more basic level of model, but it gives you kind of the key nutrient balances. Things like Feed Excel, where you have to actually pay for it to use, and it gives you a bit more user-friendly walkthrough, where ours is, we provide it for free, but it goes much more in depth. It gives you much more flexibility. But the great part about that is, like, at the end of the day, yes, we're still a company. And so you're like, well, you're biased. Of course we're biased. Everybody has biases. But here's just the raw data. You have it. If you want to take it somewhere else, get a second opinion, and talk to your vet about it, the raw data exists there, and we just give it to you.
Yeah, we're really part of your team, right? I mean, you've got your vet, your blacksmith, and us. Okay, let's talk about forage. And a lot of people, want to start looking at this forage-first diet. What's a forage-first diet?
Well, it should be every horse's diet is forage
Okay.
first, because that's what they evolved to eat. And forage, a lot of people mistake like forage is just grass, but
Right.
like I kind of alluded to before, it could be different types of shrubs, browse, different things. Horses will eat an amazing variety of things.
Mhm.
Now, it gets very kind of like there's not as much variety, I guess, in the current horse diet, but so the forage should make up the majority, because this is really when we start formulation, how we work with it, because depending on what your horse is doing, we need to select the appropriate forage for them, right? So if you have a maintenance horse that, call it pasture ornament, if you will, you really can't have them out on cool season grasses in pasture, just free choice, because they will gain way too much weight. We see the incidence of metabolic syndrome going through the roof. I think laminitis, like say about 10% of the horse population suffers from it every year. So these things we really have to be cognizant of, and what we're making available to the horse and what they're doing. Now, you take a racehorse, for instance, you want to, that's doing just a tremendous amount of work, or a 3-day eventer, you probably do want them on pasture, because you want those calories, you want that protein, that high level. Or we want a really immature forage or hay selection. We're going to give that horse, because it's going to be much higher in energy, higher in protein, a little lower in fiber. But at the end of the day, we want that horse eating a lot of forage, and we want them to spend 10 to 12, 14 hours a day eating forage.
And critical that they're constantly eating too, which is something I think a lot of people know, but it is critical that they're constantly eating.
It is critical. And like, not to, like, you go into a lot of barns and they're like, okay, we do our last feeding at 8 p.m. and we give them 2 flakes of hay. Well, you consider what 2 flakes of hay is, 2 kilos. And you're like, a horse can eat that in about an hour, hour and a half. So that takes you 10. And then what time are you coming out in the morning?
Right.
And then again, this is the theoretical and the practical come colliding together, because nobody wants to come out and clean a whole bunch of leftover hay out of their stalls. Like, oh, feed them too much, so we cut back. But you kind of do want that leftover. But there's ways around that, using things like hay nets or different things to cut down on that, ensuring the horse has access to forage all the time. Ideally, I mean, they're outside moving as much as possible and eating as much as possible, providing as natural environment as you can for them.
Right. And then we get into, okay, well, I'm kind of skipping ahead here a little bit, but we get into some horses, like race horses, are stuck in that stall for 23 hours a day. So we have to figure out a way to keep them moving and keep them eating. Then, like you said, you have your lawn ornaments that are out there too, that are constantly eating, and we need to kind of monitor that as well. So we go from one extreme to the other.
Yeah. And so, I mean, some of that is like, we just honestly, some management has to change or needs to change, because it's not an ideal situation to keep a racehorse in the stall for 23 hours a day. You want them out and you want them grazing, but they're not the ones getting it. And then you get these pasture ornaments, I guess, if you will, that are out grazing. And you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
They need to be more on
not
necessarily in, but more on a dry lot or a track system or something like that we can come up with that works, I guess, with modern day horse keeping horses. But I mean, that's the ways the systems exist. So then you start to do incremental improvements, and people do it, right? Like, a horse that's going to be in a stall 23 hours a day, they try to enrich the stall environment, whether it's just the balls the horse can play with, or just something, even the salt on a rope, which we
get him a goat.
We don't ever recommend the salt on a rope as a source of like salt, but if it's something for the horse to play with, it gives some enrichment in the stall. I mean, those are considerations you can start to put in.
You know what? When he said salt, that made me think about something. One of the coolest things that you taught me about salt, we all a lot of us put salt in our horse's diet, but it's one of those things you just kind of, that's good, right? Scott had the coolest way of explaining to me how you have fed the horse the correct amount of salt, which was, like you said, to have a kind of a separate pile of your salt, right? And if you come back and the horse has eaten all that salt, the next time you give him a little bit more until you get to a stage where he's left some salt, right? And that's when they've got enough salt in their diet. I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, it's actually the one nutrient that they have nutritional knowledge of. I guess they'll seek out salt, and sometimes you talk to people. Well, I feed a block, and you're like, do you ever see the horse actually chewing it with their teeth? The blocks are not the best delivery method. I know they're super convenient, but But even out in pasture, for instance, like if you have any cover, you can just put a corner dish of salt out there for them. But that you're absolutely right. Like keep giving them salt until they say, no, I'm good. That's enough.
Yeah.
It is. So I think we didn't really touch on it too much, but we talked about like kind of like what are the most commonly deficient nutrients,
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
And salt would be number one. And that's because it's not really natural. Like it's not any feedstuffs, unless you live maybe on the coast, like near an ocean, you might get some level of sodium in there. And then horses sweat a lot. So they excrete a lot of sodium. And so what we find in a lot of diets is there's just simply not enough salt being fed. And so that's where the recommendations come of just feed loose free choice salt. And once they're done, once they clean it up, or once they're leaving some behind, you're like, okay, I've met the requirements. The horse knows better than we do for certain about just make it available to them, and that'll take care of it.
Yeah, I think that's the neatest thing. Plus, it's way cheaper than buying the blocks, in a sense, right? Like the block just sits there and gets all gooey, unless you have. And I've very rarely seen one that absolutely loves to lick that salt block. So,
well, I mean, they don't. I mean, I wouldn't say they hate it. Like you see them in cells, and they'll use them, and people say, "Oh, they're using them." But like again, it's especially in hot weather, horses start working hard. It's just not going to be enough. So,
okay, well, that gets us to electrolytes then.
Sure.
Right, because that's another thing. Sometimes people I find will be like, "Oh, I feed the electrolytes in the summer," but they don't do it in the winter because they don't think the horse is sweating the same way. It should be a daily part of the diet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, salt, you don't even need commercial electrolytes. We sell electrolytes, and you don't even there's circumstances you absolutely should use them, like high performance horses or during exercise and after exercise. But the element that you're missing the most is sodium, which is just salt. There's lots of potassium in your horse's diet. There's typically lots of calcium. If the diet's balanced appropriately, there'll be enough magnesium. And then what there won't be enough of is sodium. And so really a lot of times you just need salt or sodium bicarb. You can use bicarb as well to get the horse to get the diet balanced in terms of sodium. And then we use electrolytes very purposefully to improve performance or increase hydration. So whether it's endurance horses or whether it's 3-day eventing or race horses, obviously, this is sweating a lot. Then we have like programs we put together for how much electrolytes we're going to add. But your daily, you want to make sure that horse is getting enough salt. And in wintertime in particular, because salt is what's going to drive water intake. And winter is like one of our biggest problems in the horse population.
Getting
it's
colic. Well, for sure, yeah.
It was a lot of times it's just driven by not consuming enough water, and you don't consume enough water because you're not consuming enough salt. The two go hand in hand in terms of driving water intake. You need salt intake. So it's one of the easiest, honestly, the least inexpensive prevention methods of colic is feeding an appropriate amount of salt.
Yeah. So
that's like a broken record.
No. This is good. This is all good stuff. So that's a common deficiency we'd find is salt. And is there anything else that kind of always rears its angry head?
Zinc, copper, and selenium would be like the big three, I'd say, in trace minerals.
We could have a whole podcast about selenium.
We will do that.
Not today.
Because my incomplete PhD is actually almost all on selenium.
Okay. Okay. Great. Because I'm telling you that we could call it selenium, the myth, the legend, right? I mean, it comes with all this bad mojo around it sometimes that we have to explain a lot of times isn't bad.
Certainly, because I mean, toxicity seems to be the number one concern with roads around selenium, but yet the bigger problem is actually deficiency. But because selenium, toxicity is an acute thing you see very obvious. Deficiency just kind of hides underneath. So the whole iceberg thing. Toxicity is at the top, deficiency is the whole thing underneath, which is actually the bigger problem that we're not recognizing.
People in Western Canada have issues with selenium different than people say here in Ontario too, right? Yeah,
there's selenium maps you can see. So through the Midwest in the US in particular, there's some very high selenium soil areas. So yes, selenium toxicity is definitely a concern in those areas. But as you get to the coast, they're going to be selenium deficient for sure. So it has to be coming from supplements. And even from that side, we're not going to get into it today very much, but maybe in a future talk, when you look at the research on selenium, we have very low requirements for the horse, which I think are probably too low. We have, I think, our vitamin E requirements a little too high and the selenium too low. These things need to probably work themselves out, which in time I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that at some point. And we should mention too, to the people who are watching, I hope there's people watching us today from the States, because
right.
we're not just here in Canada. You know, we come from Canada, we are all Canucks, but we have some great, not anymore.
We have a few PhD nutritionists down in Kentucky now as well. So
in the bluegrass state.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? And hey, we got some more questions coming in. You know, we should probably take a few questions, but I hope there are people watching us from the States today, because we're down there as well. We are madbarn.com in the United States, madbarn.ca here in Canada.
Is this like the version of a commercial break?
Would you like that?
No. Let's answer some questions. Because we were talking about water. What about water quality? Hard.
Hold on, I'm the one asking the questions.
Oh, right,
you're the genius. I'm the one asking the questions. So Julie has sent us in a question. What about water quality? Hard water, iron content, etc. Good question, Julie. We get that a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's something we overlook a lot, is the quality of the water we're giving the horse, given how much water they will consume in a day, particularly in hot weather. Hardness isn't so much a big concern. The iron content definitely is a concern. Again, if you do have high iron, which a lot of farms do because they're on well water or high sulfur, there's filters you can put in place. There's very inexpensive filters you can put in place that will filter out a good chunk of the iron, and I would highly recommend using those. And I think one thing we rarely ever talk about is like even just bacterial contamination. Now, I mean, obviously there's standards we have for well water, and so a lot of times that gets tested, but it is important, particularly if you're feeding in trough situations. You can have bacteria build up, and you definitely want to control that, right? Like you want the highest quality water going in. So it's no different than feed quality. You want the highest quality ingredients you can going into your horse, because that's going to optimize health. So water tests, like, I mean, you can tell if you're in high iron, like you get the staining. You can smell it, and there's the sulfur you get from smelling it. So if you have those things, the other thing too is like some people have it in their homes, and like if there's anybody here with IR horses, iron seems to be the hot topic in insulin-resistant horses, and we're not going to dive into that as much today. But it is in people as well, right? Some of these issues with high iron intake is also a human health issue, and so we've been running situations that people have filters on at the barn, and they're like, well, "What about your house water?" And like, "Oh no, I don't have." And you really should be doing that as well.
Sure.
And again, it doesn't need to be a very expensive system. I mean, you go to the high end to reverse osmosis and get really pure water, or you can just use a simple RV filter that they have for like campers and whatnot.
Now, let's say someone has a concern about their water and they've had it tested. Can they send us the results of their testing so that we can kind of, again, balance according to that too?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you send us your water test and you're like, we'll average out kind of what the water intake is for your horse, and then we'll contribute, okay, well, how much iron is this horse consuming from the water? And the iron content in the water is more important because it's more bioavailable. Like I think sometimes we get a little tied up in like, the iron content and the feed stuff, but the bioavailability or what actually gets absorbed is really, really low. And so it can be quite high, but the horse is going to absorb very low. But in water, absorption rates are much higher. So we will take that into consideration. So you send it to us and we'll factor it in terms of balancing out the zinc and copper essentially to your iron content.
Speaking of iron, Nicole has a question about iron. She says, I'm interested to hear more about iron. I have high iron in my water and soil. Should I avoid iron in my supplements?
Yeah, you should avoid iron in all your supplements. There is, I mean, it would be an extremely rare circumstance that you would need to add iron into a horse supplement. Now, so I'm going to have to come back to this, but one of the things that comes up, because on our tags, it'll say iron and there'll be an iron content on there. And then we get the question a lot of times is like, well, why are you adding iron to your products? And like, we're not. Iron's ubiquitous. So like, somebody said there's high iron in their soil. Well, of course it is, because it's the most abundant mineral in soil. It's everywhere. And so in our ingredients, there's always going to be iron. And like there's some culprits in there like that calcium phosphate, which is a common phosphorus source we use for feeding animals, which tends to have quite high iron content, and there's no way to get it out. And so when we use it in, say, a mineral and vitamin supplement, it contributes some level of iron. And I will come back with, again, that iron's not very bioavailable. So there's still a lot of work to be done in horses in terms of it's not just how much iron the horse is consuming, but how much is actually going to get absorbed by the horse. But by all, like, again, with the exception of very specific circumstances, it would be a vet prescribed circumstance where you would ever want to add extra iron in terms of like ferrous sulfate or iron oxide in the feed stuff. If you see those things on ingredient labels, I mean, there's some products out there back from honestly from the old racehorse days, because you know what, feed iron, you get more red blood cells. But that's not how it works. Physiology doesn't work like that, but it still lingers on. It's still around today. So I would say, as much as possible, avoid any supplemental iron. At the same time, understand that all mineral and vitamins are going to have some level of iron. Now, and here's something too. You talk about different regions, like in Canada. Well, even this is changing a little bit now, but we used to be required. You had to list the iron content, even if you weren't adding it. So people knew how much was in there. So that's why we have it on our tag. You go into different states, because it's state by state regulation. They don't always have to list iron content on there. It doesn't mean it's not in there. We just didn't have to list it.
Right.
If we take it and sample it, there's going to be some level of iron content, and we do a lot of that. Actually, we sample a lot of feeds and things just to get the full analysis. So we're giving people, a complete analysis, which isn't always readily available, anyways.
Well, there you go. No iron for you, Nicole. All right, Pauline. We're going to go back to Pauline. She was our first person to ask a question. So hopefully Pauline is still sticking around. She's probably on her second or third glass of wine. Okay.
Speaking of which, I think
that's a good idea.
Right. Yes. Next time.
We're doing that next time for sure. Okay. Questions for 50-mile endurance horse. These are pretty cool horses. This endurance stuff is amazing.
I do have to interject here. This is one of my favorite sports now. Like coming from the racehorse world, getting introduced to the endurance world. I mean, the care for the horses is like, it's, from what I've experienced anyways, which is mainly the Octra group or the Ontario group, it's phenomenal. And like the horse is number one. Like, so they're doing amazing things, but they're like, no matter what, like if there's any question the horse isn't capable of carrying on, they're like, no, we're stopping. Like, this is it's phenomenal to see this just amazing group of people.
It is. I took a call the other day. It was really funny. And I said, oh, is it a racehorse? She's like, oh yeah, it's a racehorse. It's going into a 20-mile race next week. I'm like, what kind of racehorse is that? And then, of course, again, endurance. So it's an amazing sport. Might be one that we could take up too down the line. I think
it might be a little heavy for
we'll get you a nice big one. All right. So Pauline wants to know how to get the right amount of protein for top line. Top line's a big question for us all the time. How to get the right amount of protein for top line and muscle development, amount of vitamin E needed. Well, she's got a whole bunch of questions in here. How to boost energy for the entire ride right through to the final trot out. Well, that's a loaded question. So there's a lot of things here. Top line, muscle development, vitamin E, and boosting energy.
So it kind of just addresses, break it down. So the protein question, it does come a lot, top line. And so I think as anybody that's lifted weights understands, it's the resistance that develops muscle. You just need to ensure that there's adequate nutrition to let the muscle develop. So you can never feed just a supplement and make muscle. There's got to be the work component. So the question is, let's get the appropriate amount of protein into that horse. And again, this comes back to why we have this whole model, why we break out all the amino acid components of the feed stuff, the essential amino acids. Now, I will be the first one to admit our knowledge in the horse is somewhat limited in terms of amino acid requirements, but we do our best using multiple species, the knowledge we do have of the horse to optimize what the balance would look like. And it really, again, coming back to forage analysis, knowing how much protein we're getting from the horse, because what particularly with endurance horses or any top elite athlete, what we don't want to do is overfeed protein, because overfeeding protein is actually going to decrease performance. And again, we'll save the whole why that is for another time, but it's getting a balance, and that requires knowing what the forage is going in, and then we can balance any other protein needs for the horses. And I think we talked beforehand, and we're going to talk about like what are the ideal protein sources. And here's another podcast topic: soybean meal. This is the hated soybean meal. But honestly, there's a reason soybean is so abundantly grown, because it's one of the best amino acid profiles and high protein coming from a plant. Now, again, there's been a lot of genetic modification of the soybean and whatnot, but it is one of the best sources of protein from a plant-based protein. Now, there are other protein options out there, and one of the fun things we did was a black soldier fly larvae experiment. It's still ongoing. Some of the results will come out from that. Another one, like yeast proteins are options. They're extremely high-quality protein sources. There's palatability, and there's also cost to consider with these types of things. And then there's milk proteins, which some people are okay with, some people not. The horse digests them fine. It's kind of like the soybean thing. Some people just prefer not to feed it for different reasons. But those are like all really high quality protein sources we can use. And we can use lower quality protein sources and then supplement with synthetic amino acids as well.
Okay.
As an option.
Okay.
And that's ideally, I mean, you can really get things dialed in using single amino acids because you can drop the protein down lower and then you can just put the essential limiting amino acids in. And so again, some of this involves having like really accurate analysis of what you're feeding. Right. You don't want to be like I guess the less accurate your analysis of the feeding, the more you kind of want to overcorrect, like be a little bit over, may not be ideal. So it's going to be that combination of balancing the protein sources and work to make top line happen.
And I would think for Pauline, because it's a pretty loaded question that she gave us, her best option really would be to fill out the diet evaluation form on the website, send that in and let us help her, right?
Honestly, that's the best option for everybody, because then you get your really, as much as possible, getting as accurate diet formulation as you can for your horse.
Yeah.
But I think your next question was then how much vitamin E?
Yes.
So this is a great question. Now, I think there's been different people talk about it's not just vitamin E on its own, but it's selenium as well. So like in an endurance horse, we generally recommend going higher. So like 4 milligrams of selenium minimum per day, and then probably the 2000 IUs of vitamin E. If you're going to a really high fat diet, like if you're like a high end 100 miler and you're really pounding the calories from fat to the horse, you're going to want to put the vitamin E higher, just do the oxidative stress of the amount of fat we're feeding. And then push also the selenium even higher, 6-7 milligrams per day. So
you'd be looking at the products with us, the vitamin E and selenium and the W3?
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely options to add to the horse's diet that provide both the vitamin E and selenium, because W3 has a high level of vitamin E already.
And vitamin E is great for energy, right?
Well, not energy. The W3 is great for energy, and you're getting the vitamin E at the same time.
So really, an endurance horse, you'd probably suggest the W3, correct?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Big time.
Yeah. And then, like, again, you can even just use a less expensive, because you may need more total calories than what you're just going to get from the W3 in terms of the amount you're going to feed. Right. Again, it depends on what the horse is doing. I think some of the questions will come to getting some calories into horses and what's the best way to do that.
Yeah. So, Pauline, send your stuff in to us at Mad Barn. We'll be more than happy to take a look at it. I know there's more questions coming up. There's so many of them, Scott. We really got to kind of go
through these.
I can't believe this. We thought nobody was going to watch, and look.
I think there is one more though. So how do you
get she wanted you to get from start to finish. Hold on. How to boost energy for the entire ride right through to the final trot out.
So again, a lot of that's just, is conditioning, making sure the horse is conditioned appropriately for what you're trying to do. Like going into an endurance event and the horse was not conditioned, I'm expecting to just all of a sudden perform. I get that's obvious. But again, and just conditioning to diet. So like if you're going to want to feed a higher fat diet to this horse, but it takes time for him to adapt to use that diet. So you want to be at least 6 to 8 weeks of a higher fat diet so they're getting enough energy from that. And then you can tweak the carbohydrates. And again, this is where working with a nutritionist comes in, where you're like, okay, we're going to move, X amount of beet pulp. Maybe we'll put a little bit of oats in there just for a little quicker carbohydrate punch to last, or using even a complete feed that fits the bill in those scenarios.
So if Pauline has, say, 6 to 8 weeks before you are doing this 50-mile endurance, then now's the time, right? We can start to implement those changes now.
Yeah, I think we're getting the end of their season, but
unless she's in Florida.
Well, yeah, absolutely. A lot of people ship down, so you would you want your horse conditioned to the diet that you are moving towards, and obviously the exercise program as well. But soluble fiber and fat, and I mean I think that's a pretty commonplace of where we're going to it, and it doesn't need to be complicated, right? Like it can be as simple as like I'm feeding flax beet pulp and oil, and that's my along with a great forage based program. And
it doesn't have to be that complicated. Like you say, you don't have to go for the fancy bags of this and that. It can be as simple as what you just said, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on here. We got Elissa, who is asking, what are your thoughts about beet pulp? Hey, this is a great question, because again, this is a super product to use. I feed my mare Amino Trace, W3 oil, spirulina, and jagulin. I soak it with 1 cup of alfalfa pellets and 1 cup of beet pulp. Okay, simply as a filler to mask everything else. We understand that. Should beet pulp be rinsed after soaking to remove iron, even if it's only a small amount?
Again, I would say for most people, it's unnecessary. Like if I had a horse that was really insulin resistant, then I would say absolutely. Yeah. You probably go ahead and rinse it. If your horse is healthy otherwise and not hypersensitive, then no, like a small amount of beet pulp doesn't need to be rinsed. Just soaking and feeding it, you just find the way it is.
Okay, so wait, let's go back to that, because so then she wants to know about, she's feeding aminotrace, W3, spirulina, jagulin, soaking it with alfalfa pellets and beet pulp, and really that's a pretty complete diet right there. Aminotrace, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar with that, is our special product for insulin resistant horses, or metabolic horses, we'd say, right?
Yes. So, I mean, that's what it was formulated for originally, but then, I mean, obviously it can be used for other as well. Like if you, I don't know, you always use the example when we're talking to everybody on the team, they're like, well, what do you use aminotrace for? You're like, this is what it was developed for.
Right.
We were doing a ton of custom formulas for people with these copper and zinc levels. And I was like, they're very similar. So like, if we just make a product, it'll cut down. And for people that maybe don't want to go to the excruciating detail of balancing their own every single mineral, we made that for them. But then when you look at it for even other diets, it's great. And like you still cost less than most hoof supplements.
And Omneti is the sister product too, we could say, right?
Well, it's the original.
It's the OG, but it you can go to that as well, which comes in at a lower cost as well.
Yeah. So, but it's still a great product. So this is what you run into. You're like, well, why do you have both? You know, and then one's a lot more expensive. And there's, there are slight differences. We use the natural vitamin E and the aminotrace, the phosphorus source, just to reduce the iron. I talked about using dicalcium phosphate. It's usually high in iron. Well, the phosphorus source we use in aminotrace is quite low in iron, or almost non-existent. So that reduces any kind of contaminating, what we call contaminating iron, just residual iron from ingredients. And so, that does drive the cost up. And quite frankly, like not all the horses need that high level of copper and zinc. So like we're, I don't know, I'm a minimalist. Like, the lowest amount to get the optimal result is what I want to do, in both cost and anything we're putting into the horse.
I feed Omneti. All our broodmares get it in Kentucky. My show horse gets it here. I love the product. I think it's made a really big difference. To his top line. I mean, even the lady that I have that comes out and does the massaging, the chiropractic work to him, has said what a difference she thinks it's made. And she's a person who lives around this area, so she's familiar with the Mad Barn products. But yeah, Omneti is a great product. Aminotrace too. All right.
One of the things you mentioned, top line, I want to bring this up because I think this gets overlooked. I'm willing to do a whole session on this, probably with somebody a lot smarter than me about microbiome. But there's really nice work showing that like mineral and vitamin deficiencies don't just impact the horse, they impact the bacteria that live in the gut. And so like, because there's lots of horses out there that don't get any mineral vitamins. So sometimes when you start feeding them, just the boost in the hindgut activity alone. So you can see things like top line coming and ballooning, because the amount of energy now that's getting absorbed from the hindgut, where it's supposed to really get absorbed for the horse, has increased dramatically. So it's not just what the horse do. There's the entire microbiome we have to consider when we're feeding this animal.
Okay, now Elise, she is pointing the finger out at us. She's saying, "Don't forget about your thoughts on beet pulp for forage."
So
that's the way she's saying it.
This is basically how I approach it. Like you take a forage base depending on what the horse is doing, and so say it's not meeting the horse's energy requirement, so it's going to maximize its intake on this forage, whatever that may be. You're like, well, we're still in a deficit. Well, we can take something like beet pulp, which is similar to a forage in the sense that the vast majority of that beet pulp is getting fermented in the hindgut. Now, it doesn't have some of the attributes of forage do, like a lot of chew time, because they can eat beet pulp relatively fast. Even just like what we call effective fiber, like the stimulation of the gut, it's not going to have the same as like long stem hay would. But if we want to add more energy, it's a great source because it's almost the same energy level as oats. So what we're getting is basically hindgut fermentation without the negative impacts of sugar and starch that we might have feeding something like a grain. So absolutely, so over and over again, this is the go-to, right? The forage base, if it's not cutting it, we need to add more. Then in comes the beet pulp. A little bit of flax always for the omega-3s, some soluble fiber and flax. I mean, it's kind of like the wonder food, right? You get protein, you get the fiber, the very soluble fiber from it, and you get the wonderful omega-3s. It's the highest omega-3 plant source that we have readily available. And so beet pulp's the go-to. Now,
well, a lot of people like Timothy alfalfa cubes too, though, right? Cubes.
So the thing to realize about Timothy alfalfa cubes is, I mean, you basically just took hay and compressed it into a smaller form.
But the chew time would be longer there. You keep them busy, right?
Once you pellet it, because you've ground it fine and you've pelleted, so you've already done a good chunk of the work of chewing it up. That they would like the mastication process of taking long hay. A lot of that's just the breaking down. And now we've done that mechanically for the horse, so they can eat that much faster. Now there'd be a slight difference between beet pulp and say alfalfa and Timothy. It won't be huge in terms of chew time. Like you get into something like straw, for instance, which I know we don't feed a lot of here in North America, but in Europe they do utilize straw more, and you see it more here now. Your chew time goes way up. So if you're looking for a way to like, if we had a horse, we need to reduce calories, but we want to keep them eating straw, that becomes a great choice. And I've just gone on a total tangent here from beet pulp, but again, it's, picking the right forage or feeds that meet that horse's needs, both just nutritionally and psychologically as well.
Okay. All right. So we got Elissa covered. Oh my goodness. I can't believe all these questions. This is great. Is there a ballpark parameter we should look for horse hay? Okay, hold on. Let me just read this again. Is there ballpark parameters we should look for in horse hay, percentage of protein, etc.?
Yes, we get asked this question a lot. So it's a great question. Thanks, Becky, for bringing this in, because it brings up a great point. There's ballparks in the sense that depending on what your horse is doing is where the ballparks will land, because obviously there's a wide range. In very general terms, and I think everybody gets this, as hays mature, energy decreases, protein decreases, fiber goes up. I mean, so essentially, you go from a maintenance horse. If your maintenance horse is over here, this is where you want the most mature hay. Over to your hardest working horse, you want the least mature hay. So if you're looking for ballpark figures, if you went to like, I guess the lowest quality we call hay style, you'd be down into like 8% protein, upwards of 60% NDF, a DE value of like even 1.9 or even a little bit lower megacals per kilo. I apologize if there are Americans on here, because they won't love the kilos, but the metric system rules.
So, we just got a comment. She's in Vermont, so it's
in Pennsylvania
yeah,
too.
exactly. Sorry.
I'll get it flipped over to pounds as well. To like a much higher quality, if you're into sorry, I shouldn't read the screen while I talk. If we're going to a higher quality, we'd be up into upwards 12, even up to 14% crude protein, in the low 40s NDF, with a DE value that might be pushing 2.2 megacals, even up to 2.3, depending on the species of hay we're using. And just to put this in context, so like if we go from your average 1,100 pound horse, I can flip back for it a little bit, but 1,100 pound horse is going to need 16 to 18 megacals of energy a day. Up to a hard working horse is going to need, say, 30 to 32 megacals. Okay. So it's almost a double when you go from that first day I was talking about. The low energy would provide that 18 megacals. If it's 1.8 megacals per kilo, horse eats around 10 kilos of dry matter, and we're hitting right on the ballpark for that. Then we go up to this really high energy, needs 30, but we only are getting 2.3 megacals out of a really we'll call young immature hay. So that would be 23 megacals. So we still have a deficit, right? Yeah. So this is what we're talking about when we balance the diet. We can maximize forage intake. We may get up to 25, 26 megacals. We still have like maybe 4 to 6 megacals to make up. And we'll do that with other ingredients, things like fat, which we use fat and oil interchangeably in the horse industry, because almost all fat sources we feed to horses are liquid oil or vegetable oil. So it's oil. And we'll use that to boost up the energy content of the diet.
Actually, that was one of the questions that we wanted to talk about too. And we can do that one right now, just because it fits where we are. So with horses in competition or heavy work, what are the main things we need to add to their diet? So as you said, we're adding the oil, say, for the energy, right?
Yeah.
What else would we maybe consider adding? More of something? Boosting something?
Again, like oil soluble fiber is what, like, as the energy requirements go up, we want to go to more and more soluble fiber. So that just means, so when we say soluble fiber, that means it's going to digest more. The extended digestion of the high gut is going to be greater. So the absorption of, basically we call them volatile fatty acids that can turn into glucose in the horse. And that's how we want the horse to get its glucose, is from the hindgut, not from the small intestine, from starch and sugars. mainly. And then fat's another great one because it's a great opportunity, very, very energy dense, reduces the thermal load on the horse. So again, I want to start talking about endurance horses and thermal load. Fat content's a great way to reduce the thermal load on a horse while providing a lot of calories.
And that diet would change too as the season goes, because as the horse is kind of working and getting ready for show season and competition season, and then as the horse lets down from that, right? So we're changing that diet again.
Yeah, and I mean, you can really, like, if you really want to dive into this, like like a very high level competitive horse, for instance, like your number one detriment to speed, height, or performance is weight.
Right.
So cutting weight is going to give you your biggest bang for your buck, assuming everything else is perfect, right? Assuming your diet's perfect, assuming the horse is in great health, and all these other things are perfect. Cutting weight off the horse, and so gut fill is a huge chunk of this weight. So you can start getting into ways. Okay, can we, reduce the water holding capacity of the feeds we're feeding this horse as we come into competition without creating digestive disturbances and optimize. And the great thing about fat and oil is a great parameter to provide really dense calories with low amount of weight that's going in the horse. So for 98% of the people, though, I would just say, yeah, we want to ramp up. We'll ramp up consistently. We're going to keep it consistent, and then we're going to ramp down some workload. And we'll just keep it a nice, even diet. If you want to get into that, like the last 1%, really start tweaking, there are things we can do there. But you would want to be under a strict guidance of a nutritionist, working together very tightly. You just don't want to be freewheeling on that one.
Okay, actually, and here's a question that's an easy answer, and we get it asked all the time. Becky writes asking, have Mad Barn supplements been approved for FEI use?
Yeah, you don't really get approved for FEI use. What you do is you don't have ingredients in them that are banned by FEI. The FEI doesn't approve anybody's supplements per se. It's just that you don't have ingredients that would be banned from FEI. And the answer to that is no, we don't use anything that's banned by the FEI.
Yeah,
I think that's as straightforward.
Yeah, and people ask us the same thing for racing too. Are these products something I can use during racing?
Yeah, no, and absolutely. I mean, sodium bicarb is a great ingredient to use, but a lot of times we just don't use it because in racing, sodium bicarb, and a lot of times these guys are pushing the line on, or people are pushing the line on how much bicarb they're feeding these horses before they go to race. So we don't put any of that into our products also, just to avoid that situation where, if you are going to feed it, everything will be exactly measured to how much is getting fed. Okay,
here's another one for you, Scott. Curious to know more about I'm skipping ahead. Is it true excess iron can excess, sorry.
That's okay.
Is it true excess iron can create heart issues? My mare just recently had a cardioversion surgery. Oh, that doesn't sound good. And vet mentioned high iron can create her fib
atrial fib to recur. Yeah, I think is what they're going for.
Well, that's too bad.
Yeah, I think this is probably out of the realm of this conversation.
Yeah.
I don't. Again, this is the excess iron really comes back to how much is actually being absorbed, and this is a really, really gray area when it comes to horse nutrition. So I'm not going to say one way or the other whether this could be an issue. I would find it unlikely. It would have to be quite high, I would think, to cause that kind of issue. But it would be impossible to say for sure. Yeah. One way or the other, honestly.
I hope she's gonna. Sounds like quite a bit of a recovery too. So gotta wish her good luck with that, right? All right. Next question we've got is from Nicole, I think. Right. Curious to know, more about yeast protein. Is that the brewer's yeast or yeasac?
Well, technically, yeasac is brewer's yeast, although I think the term brewer's yeast is basically you get dead yeast from the brewing process, or the leftover spent yeast. So that's what brewer's yeast is. And it's very used in human nutrition. There's a lot of great nutrients in brewer's yeast. The specific yeast protein they're talking about is the yeast has a very thick cell wall. And so companies have come up with ways for fractionating that cell wall, and they use it for very specific things. They can use it for, and we use it in a lot of our products for not stimulating, but modulating the immune system, binding toxins being two of the big ones. But what you get left over with when you fractionate the yeast cell wall is the basically yeast cell contents, which are rich in nucleotides and in very high protein quality. So it's a very specific product. It's not brewer's yeast or yeasac. Both those products contain the entire cell wall and obviously the cell contents as well. But what I'm speaking about you'll see it. They use it in human foods a lot, just as a flavoring, essentially to make it. But because some of these companies are producing so much of this yeast cell wall that they're using for very specific purposes, it's almost become a byproduct now that we can use in animal feeds as a very high quality protein source. It's not something you would find readily available though on a store shelf anywhere. We do include in several of our products though, like the ODH or the visceral,
Right.
because again, it does have gut modulating effects as well.
And
that we use it for.
You know what? That actually brings us up to another good question. Before we get to Jill's question, Nancy says, when using salt, can we just use normal table salt?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah. So again,
easy peasy. Yeah. Bulk barn.
Yeah. Or Costco, any bulk place or feed store. You get feed grade salt. Understand that feed grade salt won't be iodized, so there'll be no iodine in that. Again, if you're using a good mineral vitamin like Omni-80, for instance, you don't need to worry about whether there's iodine in your salt. So, or you can just bulk table salt is just fine. Good. And I quite actually advise people to stay away from any fancy marketing of salts.
Yeah.
Like if somebody's marketing you salt, I would just run the other way.
All right, we got a question here from Jill. Jill would like to know your thoughts on feeding MSM to young horses. I feel it's often associated with senior horses. That's true. But I've seen people use it on young growing horses as well.
Yeah, I mean, young growing horses have inflammation as well. I think you could make the argument there's a lot of good research on MSM and just helping to control inflammation and just general joint health. It's certainly not a cure-all by any stretch, but again, it's relatively low cost, easy, and it's a great sulfur source, quite frankly. And not that we see too much in the way of sulfur deficiency by any stretch. A lot of times because it's in the water, it's too high. But sometimes there have been diets roll across where you're like, wow, this is sulfur deficient, and so the MSM can cover that up as well. And
we actually recommend the MSM with the W3 for horses who have arthritis and issues with joints as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, it's, to me, when you look at the literature and the benefits, it's the most cost effective, the biggest bang for your buck. Whereas, and again, I mean, there's decent research on glucosamine and things like chondroitin and stuff like that. But the cost benefit, I don't know, it's not conclusive enough to say like, oh, they should be adding this. Yeah. Okay. Oh, let's see. What do we got up here next? What's best for, this is a whole other topic. One day, Kathy, I'm making lists of all the different podcasts we're going to do. I've got iron, selenium, soy, and we will do one about insulin resistant horses. I mean, we get so many questions about insulin resistant horses at Mad Barn. Well, honestly, I think go back to the history of kind of how we ended up in AminoTrace and where we are, because we were one of the few companies, I guess, that would deal with a lot of these insulin resistant horses. We would make custom formulas for them. We would recognize their unique nutritional needs and just be like, oh, just feed them this, it's fine. Sorry, what to feed? What's best for an insulin resistant horse? And I can't stress this enough because it's the same for humans. Exercise. Get them moving. Exercise. You got to get the diet right, but exercise will just have such a profound impact. I mean, you can essentially, you will reverse insulin resistance by increasing the level of exercise. Now, I get there's cases where, particularly if you had a laminitis episode, where exercise is a bit prohibitive just because of lameness, in which case, then you want to control the caloric intake. You want to get your minerals and vitamins balanced, absolutely. So it'd be similar to any recommendation, honestly, that we give any horse, is keep your NSC low, so your starch and sugar is low, below 10%. Ensure your horse is eating adequate, the minerals and vitamins are balanced. But again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of exercise. And even a little bit of you get some high intensity worked in there, build the horse up. You'll just see profound changes in the health of the horse. Yeah, we've got some great articles on our website too about insulin resistance in horses. So if you're ever not sure about something, I always tell people, go to the website. You'll see a little magnifying lens there in the top right-hand corner. Click on that and put in what you want to know about. Yeah. There's so many articles on there. Yeah, many. It's amazing, actually, the articles that we've built out. And again, if you go through them, they're peer-reviewed, or it's all based on peer-reviewed literature. It's all fully referenced, which again, if anybody finds things that aren't, and you're like, no, Mad Barn seems to be losing the course, please write me directly, because we'll rectify that right away. It's something I've been very staunch about, that the information we provide is all peer-reviewed. It's not sensationalist or a bunch of marketing. It's just good, solid information. Okay, how much W3O would you give to a foal? How old a foal are we talking?
Well, let's start with what age you would start giving.
Honestly,
W3.
I would give it to the mare. I wouldn't give it to the foal. Feed the mare W3 about 2 to 3 months prior to foaling, and actually throw ODH in that as well. There's lots of good research showing IgG increase in colostrum, which is so imperative for foal health. So I would say start with the mare first. And then I wouldn't even feed the W3 to a foal until they're about 6 months old. Let them get it from the mare, because the DHA will transfer into the milk and the colostrum, and let them get it that way.
Let's say, again, we've got, yearling sales are coming up.
Right.
Standardbred yearling sales coming up right around the corner here in Ontario. The Keeneland sales on right now, the Select sale, putting those yearlings on the W3.
Yeah, again, kind of hitting that 6 month age point. Yeah, absolutely. You start, the 30 to 60 mil range, and keeping on all the way through.
Yeah.
It's it's no different for a horse. Like you look at brain development things, but again, if we can get it through the mare first and allow the foal to nurse and look at it that way, the DHA, the beneficial fatty acid we're trying to get into them. And then as they're weaned, absolutely start at 30 mils at low level. And you can increase it up to, like, for a yearling, if you really want them to shine, you want that glow.
They
on
look
them, right?
fabulous. They do.
You can go up to like 100 mils at the 12 months. And they will just absolutely shine.
I've seen it. Well, we use it with our brood mares and our foals, and they look fantastic. But the coolest part is that you basically can bring a horse out of the pasture where he's just been hanging around in the field. They take a towel and go like this, and he's clean and shiny. Like the shine on them, especially on black horses and chestnuts, it's outstanding. They look phenomenal on it. 4 months is how old Nancy's is. So if
they were weaned by 4 months and you had them now on, say, some feed and hay, then they're obviously on their own now. They're off the mare. Then you could start at 4 months. That's fine. But again, just get 30 mils. Like, I wouldn't go get carried away with it.
Yeah, and don't leave it on the ground, because the dog loves it. Dogs love W3, and it's totally okay for them to have it, right?
Yeah, again, slowly introduce, just like any supplement. You're like slowly introduce, because if your dog gets carried away with it, you may be making a lot of visits outdoors.
Okay, next one is from another Nancy. We got another Nancy here. Horses in work. We want to add the right kind of oil. Hold on, we're going to make this bigger so I could. Horses in work. We would want to add the right kind of oil, offering a balance of calories and the DHA benefits. Not all oils are created equal. Love W3 for covering all the bases. Thanks so much, Nancy.
Yeah, Nancy, you're absolutely right. Not all oils are created equal in terms of what they're providing in terms of fatty acid content. They are fairly equal in terms of energy content. But like when you start looking at the health benefits, absolutely. DHA, those long chain unsaturated fatty acids, and this isn't something we provide, but my cat likes to.
I know.
I gotta stop looking at the screen. But like medium chain triglycerides, like you get out of coconut, there's specific health benefits to that as well in terms of energy. It's not something we deal in necessarily, mostly because it's not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just like we haven't found to be the premier supplier of it, so we just let other people do it, I guess, for now.
Yeah, and I can tell you there's a huge supply of it in the back.
The W3,
yeah. And there's more coming. I mean, he said today, it's a massive vat full of W3, so that's pretty awesome. I mean, again, it's kind of cool for me because it feels like a full circle moment you remember when we just had little small amounts of things that we were selling out of the trunks of our cars, and now
it's never out of the trunk of the car. Come on.
It's just amazing to see how much product there is back here. Becky Wright said that her cat likes W3 too, and I'm sure that's fine in a very small amount.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it has a beautiful shiny coat.
Dogs and cats absolutely are quite accustomed to high fat diets, so it's like it's funny when you talk about like a dog and a cat would get a good chunk of their calories from fat, where a horse, like on a forage only diet, would only get about 2% would be fat, right? So then there's time, and that's like sometimes you see these massive benefits to just that little bit of oil added, particularly. And here's the crazy thing with IR horses: you would think it'd be counterintuitive to add oil to an IR horse, and it is if it's the wrong oil. But sometimes it actually has a big benefit. I think it has a satiety effect. It also, just transit time in the gut. I'm shaking the table here. Sorry. But, there are cases because the diets can get so low and fat, especially when we're feeding low quality forages, restrict calories. You do actually want to feed a little bit of supplemental fat, not too much again, because you want to control the caloric intake, but the specific fatty acids that we want to get into that horse community really beneficial, particularly DHA, those long chain fatty
that
acids.
DHA is awesome. Jill's just saying she loves W3. She gives it to her 2-year-old and her senior horses, and that's the cool part about it. I mean, really, it's any age range, as we just talked about. You could start as young as 4 months old, and they could take it right up to their senior years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just adjusting it along the way. So, I think really, Scott, we're at 8 o'clock. This was a pretty awesome hour of questions and people, giving us comments on the product and them using the product. And, this really is kind of our inaugural run at our very first podcast, which I'd like to call, I have a couple of different names for it. The Crazy Good Podcast, because we've always called ourselves Crazy Good Nutrition, or Grain on the Brain, which I also like. And next time we learn, we're bringing wine.
We might have to do a survey on Grain on the Brain. We're not sure. We're not all sold on that one.
Okay. But next time we know we're bringing wine and cheese and all that kind of good stuff. We'll just have dinner.
We'll just invite everybody in instead of doing this on Facebook. They can all come in and join us in studio for the wine and cheese.
Exactly. And a giveaway. And you get a car, and you get a car, right?
Let's not get carried away.
Not a car. You get W3. You get W3. That'll work for now.
Actually, we take one more question there. Nicole's got a good question.
Sorry, I missed this one. Do you have any thoughts on Teff versus Timothy for metabolic horses? Are either superior for nutritional content?
So the reason I asked you to bring this one up is because, again, it comes down to so much about maturity at stage of harvest and what the actual nutrient content is. So, basically with a metabolic horse, you're going to want low NSC. So it wouldn't matter whether it's Timothy or Teff, depending on when you harvest it. So here's a great thing, actually. I say this to a lot of people. They're like, oh, I didn't realize that. If you have an IR horse, try to cut your hay first thing in the morning, because the sugar content will be the lowest.
Right.
And then as it lays out, it respires anyways. Is what burns up even more sugar content, and you get it down lower. So again, it really comes back to, it's not so much about the species that you're picking from, with the exception of alfalfa. Some IR horses, for some reason, do not seem to tolerate alfalfa very well. And this is a great, we want to dig right into that, because I don't know why. There's a lot of different theories why, and I don't think they're right, quite frankly. So it's going to be interesting to dig into. But with Tefe and Timothy, again, it would just come down to it being low NSC, appropriate protein level, appropriate maturity for an insulin-resistant horse. I don't think one's necessarily better or worse.
Okay.
Just appropriate maturity to pick for your horse.
Great. And that's how we're going to wrap up our very first podcast. I think it was pretty awesome. What about you? I mean, I know I was good.
Of course, you're amazing always.
Please. He's a wealth of information. I mean, this is a brain that we're really going to have to pick on for the next year or so. And we're going to do these podcasts regularly, right? I mean, we'll try to do them as often as we can.
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, first of all, I want to thank everybody that's on here. I want to thank all our customers. Most of all, it's this is legitimately is a dream come true for me to be able to deliver the research program that we're putting in place, first and foremost, and that is all driven by the support we get from our customers to go ahead. And we'll actually, there's a great YouTube video by Emily, Dr. Leishman, sorry, kind of talking about what we're doing, some of the foundational work. Anyways, and so thank you everybody for being here. And by all means, at any time, reach out. Available, maybe not as responsive as I should be all the time, but I do my best.
He's a busy guy. I mean, he has to coach basketball too, right?
Yeah. No, I leave that to the experts. I just go watch and cheer them on.
And you know what? I think the other thing we could suggest to the people watching today too is, if you have any ideas for podcasts, things you want Scott to talk about,
sure. Topics or people that are way smarter than me, we can get them on to talk about these things. Yeah,
as somebody mentioned, we could do a roadshow. I'm good. Like Florida in the winter, great, we'll be there. Yes, more products, please. I love my horses. Love your products. You know what? My horse loves his products too. And that's important to all of us who are horse owners, because really our horses are our kids in some cases. I mean, certainly there's lots of working horses out there that are performing, that are competitive, that are racing, whatever. But I've got a heart horse, and I know a lot of you do too. And it's really important that we keep them healthy. So thanks, Scott, for everything today. And thanks for the job. And And I guess we'll see you all again soon. I'm not sure when we're going to do this, but when we do, we will let you know. We'll put it on our Facebook
Yeah,
page.
absolutely.
We'll put it on our social media and let you know. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.